Welcome to CT169Strong's April 27th, 2025 webinar, moderated by CT169Strong President and Fairfield Zoning Commissioner Alexis Harrison, with State Senator from the 36th District serving Greenwich, New Canaan, and Stamford, Ryan Fazio, and CT169 Strong co-founder, Board of Finance and Affordable Housing Committee member from New Canaan, Maria Weingarten, and CT169 Strong member, environmental attorney, and Fairfield Zoning Commissioner Catherine Braun.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Alexis Harrison. I am part of CT169 Strong, the only grassroots organization in Connecticut that is defending your local zoning rights. And we're going to do things a little different tonight. Senator Ryan Fazio, who we had the pleasure of having tonight, he's on the Planning and Development Committee, but he's also a ranking member of the Energy and Technology Committee in Hartford. And we're going to be talking about energy costs in Connecticut. In addition to Senator Fazio, we also have Maria Weingarten, co-president of CT, or co-founder of CT169 Strong, along with Catherine Braun, a member of CT169 Strong, as well as an environmental attorney and a member of the Fairfield Plan and Zoning Commission. Obviously, affordability is a vital concern to all of us, and Senator Fazio has really been, focusing on that throughout his entire legislative career, from tax relief to energy costs and local decision maker. He's really been advocating for policies that he believes will lower the costs of living and really improve the state's overall economic health. And when we talk about affordable housing, we want to make sure that we have policies in place already relative to our energy that is making things, affordable for everybody. So I'm going to turn it over to him tonight, and he's going to go over a slide presentation on our energy costs and what we can do a little differently to improve our livability here in Connecticut. All right.
Thank you, Alexis, and thank you to 169 Strong for hosting me again here for maybe a little different presentation. One of the things I've appreciated about CT169 Strong is that they've argued that we do need to make our state more affordable, and that, for instance, on the housing front, that requires putting our municipalities in the driver's seat when making decisions in a strategic way to create affordability, availability of housing, but also to respect the interests of municipalities. But that also means many other things in order to create an affordable state. Connecticut's been unaffordable across many dimensions for a long period of time. We have the second highest second highest tax burden. We have the third highest property tax burden, which is a uniquely difficult burden to handle for residents and makes housing unaffordable, whether you're a renter or a homeowner. And then something that we've heard a lot in recent years from residents is that Connecticut has the third highest electric rates in the entire country, which makes our state unaffordable for working class people, middle class people, seniors, who are otherwise having a difficult time paying their rent, paying their mortgage, because their Eversource bill almost seems like a second mortgage to them. So what I've been doing for the past couple of years is trying to highlight the reasons for those high costs, which I think disproportionately include state policies that have inflated the cost burden in our state, and also trying to highlight positive reforms that would make our energy burden in this state more affordable, and therefore make our state more affordable for everybody, including job creators, including seniors, including middle class and working class people. So I and other colleagues are going to be going all around the state presenting an alternative for a more affordable energy portfolio, for more affordable energy bills across the state. We kicked that tour off in New Canaan just this past week, so the first of what should be a dozen or two town halls, and it was very well attended with 100 people there. It's normally difficult to get a dozen people to a town hall, but this is a topic that people are hungry to understand and hungry for a change. So I'll share the presentation and go through it quicker than I did on this week. And here's the presentation mode. So that's what I look like when I'm about to turn on the light or the air conditioning, because I know how it will show up in my Eversource bill. So what do we know? Three things I think almost everybody agrees on. Electric bills are too damn high in this state. State policies bear a lot of responsibility for those high rates. And finally, that we need state leadership and better state policies in order to fix that. First, Connecticut, for a long period of time, has boasted some of the highest energy rates in the country. But in recent years, it's risen all the way to second or third, and we normally oscillate between the second and third position in the country. And if you look at the graph on the right, it's not just that we have a high ranking compared to other states. It's also a problem that we see our rates going up year after year. That's whether natural gas costs are really high as they were in 2022. Even despite the fact that they went down in 2023 and 2024, our overall rates increased. So we have a problem. There's no doubt about it. And it doesn't just mean that our pocketbooks are crowded out because of those high bills, but it also means our economy becomes more narrow and cannot grow. We cannot add manufacturing and heavy industry because of our high input costs. Many have said when they talk to job creators across the state that for a long period of time, they heard that high taxes were the biggest inhibition to creating jobs in the state. That might have changed, that now energy costs are probably the number one reason, certainly, that industrial companies, manufacturing companies could not create jobs in a state that once boasted one of the best high-tech manufacturing industries in the country. So in the last 10 years, the nation has seen an 8% increase in manufacturing jobs. Connecticut has lost 1% of its manufacturing jobs. High energy costs, high input costs are a primary reason for that. So taking a step back, there's a lot that's changed in our energy sector in New England over the last 25 years, and some of it's been for the better. So Connecticut and New England used to rely heavily on coal and oil burning power plants just 2 decades ago. Those release much higher emissions. They release particulate matter that are bad for air quality. And because of the natural gas revolution, the fracking revolution, as near as Pennsylvania and Ohio, natural gas became abundant in New England, including in the Northeast. And so natural gas began to outcompete coal and oil to the point that coal and oil plants basically all shut down in the Northeast. And so we're left with a more affordable primary source of power generation in natural gas, but also one that is cleaner compared to coal and oil. So that's where we've come from. And you notice renewables has increased slightly from 7% to 12% in that period of time. Nuclear, unfortunately, decreased slightly because we saw a Massachusetts nuclear plant and a Vermont nuclear plant close in that time. But the biggest change has clearly been natural gas, coal, and oil. And what has that meant? That meant our environmental footprint got smaller, got better in New England. We see a 50% drop in carbon emissions in New England over the last 15 years, actually. That's an extraordinary change, and it wasn't because of a dictate from any of our state governments or the federal government. It was because of market competition and improvements in making natural gas available and affordable compared to coal and oil. Now, we're also wondering, what are we paying for? 2 years ago, I helped pass a major bipartisan energy bill that included, among other things, language that memorialized a requirement to tell people what they're paying for in their energy bills. So there's 4 main categories. First is supply. That is the cost of buying the electricity in the market directly from power plants who are selling it. Second is transmission, which is the high voltage wires and infrastructure that transmits electricity, delivers electricity. Third is the delivery charge. That is the low voltage infrastructure costs. So the lower lying poles and wires and transformers and substations. So one of the other differences between transmission and delivery is that transmission is primarily regulated by the federal government, by FERC, and delivery is primarily regulated by the Public Utilities Commission. So PURA in Connecticut, it's state regulated, and transmission and delivery are where the utilities make their money, where they're enabled to make a profit, unlike supply or public benefits. The fourth category is something that has only kind of seen the light of day. The public has been only informed of the last couple of years because of the bill transparency, the bill redesign. And that's the public benefits, which is the cost of state mandated programs, over 50 of which are paid for through your electric bill. So that those it's a pretty sprawling category, over 50 different programs, some of which have existed a long period of time, and some of which have just been created in the last couple of years. What are they? There's many of them. This is a list of only some of them in 2023. They total altogether $812 million in just the Eversource system. So there's a 1.2 million Eversource customers in Connecticut, CLNP customers. The total public benefits they're paying is $812 million. If you exclude the two purchases of energy from the nuclear plants, it was $764 million in 2024. So still extraordinarily high. That's just a very small percentage of the overall cost. It backs out to $677 for the average Eversource customer in Connecticut who's consuming, say, 700 kilowatt hours per month. So if you have a bigger house or a bigger consumption profile every month, you're paying a lot more than that, about 20+% of your total energy bill. And it's not just that they're significant in scope, it's that they've been increasing significantly in the last few years. The public benefits they have doubled since 2018. And even without Millstone included, the nuclear plant purchase, which really makes things volatile because sometimes it's in the money, sometimes it's cheaper than the market rate for electricity, and sometimes it's more expensive. So even if you strip out the Millstone contract, you see the trend is the same, more than doubling of public benefits costs for Connecticut residents since 2018. That equates to a $400 million tax increase on Connecticut residents through their electric bills. One of my colleagues in the General Assembly tried to break out what the public benefits include. And so there's 57 different programs. So it's difficult to categorize them. But I would say the biggest category is for private energy producers, subsidies. So subsidies for mostly solar. Some of it's the solar on people's roofs. Some of it's the solar farms in large fields. Some of it's on commercial and industrial buildings. There's subsidies for fuel cells, for wind, for nuclear, like we talked about. But it's all for private producers, private or for-profit producers, with the biggest category being solar. The second biggest category in the public benefits I would describe as the redistributive social program. So if you're a lower income resident, you can get a subsidy on your bill. That's a socialized cost that everyone else pays for in their bills. The people or the businesses who didn't pay their bills over the last several years, those uncollectibles are also included in that category that we made. And finally is energy efficiency programs, many of which are good programs, in my opinion. Things like advanced metering, demand response, so on and so forth are subsidized through our energy bills as well. And there's several other categories. There's a couple, I think, of popular misconceptions. The first is that the public benefits are going away. The charges are expiring. Every one of the 57 different programs and line items is different. So yes, some of those will end and have ended, but there's also new ones being put on our bill. Most of them are not ending, they're continuing. And so don't expect this to go away. These costs are volatile. Sometimes they'll be 10% of your bill, and sometimes they'll be 30% of your bill, but they'll average out to, I think, about 20% of your bill going forward. And the nuclear contracts have only accounted for 2% of all the public benefits since 2019 when they were inked. It's not a high percentage; it's a low percentage overall. Now, we're worried about high costs now, but it could get worse. What we know is that we learn on the first day of our economics classes in college and high school is that price is determined by supply and demand. And if you have an increase in demand, it's going to cause an increase in cost. Well, according to the regional regulator, I call them ISO New England, which oversees kind of the Northeast electricity market, their projections expect a doubling of electricity demand in 20 to 25 years. Primarily, that comes from a few different categories: data centers, electric vehicles, and electrification of heat. Their projection actually doesn't include data centers. I think their electric heat number might be a little high, but those three categories are causing substantial increases in electric demand, which obviously means that we're going to need to create new supply in the market. That's difficult. That's not an easy thing to do. And the existing efforts to increase supply have been very costly. They've experienced overruns and delays. So some of these things are not even coming online because of those problems. ISO New England predicts that the new supply theoretically would come from primarily offshore wind, and secondarily battery power, which is not actually creating energy, but actually it's just storing energy. So that's kind of duplicative in a way, and then a little bit of solar. But we all know the problems with these sources of energy is that they only work when the sun is shining and the wind is blowing. And you need to have the electric grid working at all hours of the day and night. This is not an option and not a nice to have. It's an imperative. People die when you have blackouts. People die when it's too hot and their AC isn't working. They die if it's too cold and the electric heat and power isn't working. This is not an option. This is requirement. And so trying to make an electric grid work that is heavily reliant on intermittent sources that only turn on or turn off when the weather is working is a difficult task. It's not a task to be taken lightly. Not only that, but with the increase in kind of the decentralized sources of electric generation, so solar farms and solar panels and wind farms and so on, you're going to be in need of building out a lot more infrastructure. Eversource and United Illuminating are going to be building out a lot more substations and wires and poles and transformers. And that too will have a major cost. It also potentially can mean that with the increase in electric demand and the increase in solar and wind and battery power, that the utilities are slated to make a lot more money in the future. I think that's an undertold story that the utilities could make a killing on the energy transition if regulators permit them to. The regulators have been a little bit less pliant to the utilities here in Connecticut, but just up the street in Massachusetts, the regulators and the state authorities are doing everything they can to help the Eversource make money up there. So Eversource is going to make a lot of money in Massachusetts. But the cost of just the substation investments to handle the increase in EV demand in Connecticut, according to Eversource, will be $2 billion, approximating $1,500 per household. So I hope you have $1,500 lying around to pay for out of your electric bill. Likewise, as I said, the reliance, according to the regional regulators, most of the think tanks, for future power generation is expected to be from offshore wind. Offshore wind has seen a huge increase in costs, huge cost overruns, huge delays to the point that Connecticut actually chose not to participate in the latest RFP for offshore wind. The first deal signed was at 10 cents per kilowatt hour for offshore wind. It's kind of approximated that the current cost to build new offshore wind is about 16, 17 cents per kilowatt hour. That, for context, compares to about 4 cents per kilowatt hour to generate power from a natural gas plant. So you're looking at new offshore wind would cost probably 4 times what existing power costs produced by a nuclear plant, by a natural gas plant. Nuclear, the Millstone power plant is 5 cents per kilowatt hour, so not much higher than natural gas. This is my approximation of where the cost per source of power generation is about now. I think natural gas plants, that's the volatile market, but it's the lowest cost market. It's the traded kind of competitive market, can be 30 cents, can be up to 50 cents per kilowatt hour, or $30 to $50 per megawatt hour. That should be megawatt hour, not kilowatt hour on the left. This is why we do the presentation. The nuclear contract we have is $50 per megawatt hour. Hydropower can vary, but be anywhere from $40 to $80 is my estimate. Wind, the lowest cost is $100, and I think the new wind farms that are being signed by Massachusetts and Rhode Island and New York are probably going to come in upwards towards $170. And solar can be anywhere from $100 per megawatt hour. And then there are programs in Connecticut that actually subsidize residential solar at $330 per megawatt hour. So that costs about 8 to 9 times more than the market rate for electricity. It's like kind of like going to the gas station and buying gasoline for $27 per gallon. And then on the right, that's what the capacity factor is of different sources approximated for different sources of energy. That's basically how often they run compared to their total capacity. Nuclear, natural gas run frequently and are pretty reliable. Hydropower is kind of in the middle. Wind and solar run when the weather permits. So you have to find something to fill in the gap for those sources. When they don't run and when demand is really high, the alternative is actually oil, because the oil-powered power plants can turn on at the drop of a hat. The fuel can be stored on the premises, and those get subsidized by the grid in order for their kind of standby capacity to fire up at sometimes 5 minutes notice when demand is far outpacing supply. And oil is very dirty, so that's exactly what we want to avoid. The problem is that the more we rely on some of the intermittent renewables like wind and solar, and if the sun isn't shining or the wind isn't blowing, then the only available resource that's economical to fill in the gap as is oil. And sometimes it increases all the way to 40% of all the power generated in New England on a really cold day. This is the profile. This 30% day for oil was a couple of Christmases ago when it was very, very cold, you might remember. The alternative to not keeping the power on is rolling blackouts. And places like California have been experiencing rolling blackouts even in the past year with all the policy decisions that they've made. The nice thing about California is the weather is very, very temperate and manageable. With the humidity in the summers in Connecticut and with the freezing temperatures in the winter, that is not an option for us. More people will die here than in other places, and that cannot be something we accept in a first world country, in a rich region of that country. I've painted, I think, a pessimistic picture, but I think there is a better way. We can make maybe Connecticut not the most affordable state in the country from an energy standpoint, but we can make it more affordable, closer to average or above average, which would save people hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dollars per year. We can keep the lights on. We can create an energy portfolio and grid that enable economic growth and opportunity for everyone. So I co-authored a 6-point plan that I first released in January of 2023, so over 2 years ago, and I've updated several times in the past couple of years. The first proposal is to end the public benefits charge. That's a hidden tax on your electric bill that funds discretionary government programs. If those programs should exist, they should exist through and be financed through the normal budget process, like anything else is. Every 2 years, the funding should be approved, the program should be vetted, and the legislature, your elected officials, should be forced to vote on them rather than them continuing for 10 years, 20 years without any sort of second vote after they're first passed. That means that many of the programs would still exist. I think the energy efficiency programs, for instance, would get very strong bipartisan support, and they could be funded through the budget. Others that are superfluous, like what is it? I think $50 million a year to subsidize private electric vehicle charger installations. So grandma on her fixed income, on her Social Security income, is forced to pay a higher electric bill. For a millionaire in Avon to get $1,000 subsidy for a new electric vehicle charger for his Tesla. That's something that happens. I think most people in the legislature wouldn't want to go back to their constituents and say they voted to renew that program every 2 years. Second, we should limit the subsidy for those long-term purchases of electricity at no more than 2.5 times the market rate for electricity. I think that might sound like a pretty modest proposal, but there are people. The Commissioner of Energy always argues with me that that this proposal is a bad idea. I think saying something like we shouldn't, in your own household, saying things like you wouldn't buy a gallon of gasoline for more than $8.50 would be a pretty modest budgetary policy and decision in your own household. Why shouldn't we have the equivalent for families for the state of Connecticut? Yes, you might want to subsidize long-term purchases of electricity above market rate for various reasons, like incentivizing more renewables, but it shouldn't be 2.5 times the market rate. Let's be reasonable. Third is to include all hydro and nuclear power in our Class 1 renewable portfolio standard. Hydro and nuclear are zero carbon. They're clean burning. They're zero emissions, and they're more reliable than wind and solar. So I don't think that they should get worse treatment under our renewables programs in the state of Connecticut than do wind and solar. Hydro and nuclear, to a minor extent, are now included in our renewable portfolio standard, and I was happy to help pass bipartisan legislation that included more hydro and included new nuclear in our renewable portfolio standard. That was in the same 2023 bill, bipartisan bill that I mentioned before, that I work with Senator Needleman and Representative Steinberg on. But I think we need to include all hydro and all nuclear. I think it's only fair. It's only equitable. Why not have something clean, all clean sources of energy on the same playing field? That seems like fairness to me. It seems like good environmental and economic policy to me. Fourth is to separate PURA from DEEP. So PURA is the Public Utilities Regulatory Authority that's responsible for regulating our utilities and setting rates. They're like a judge, an adjudicatory body. The Department of Energy and Environmental Protection is a policy-making body. It's a political body. But PURA is subordinate in our organization structure of the state government to DEEP. You could say that, yeah, people in DEEP aren't intervening in PURA's activities. Yeah, but there is a subconscious problem that's inherent when someone is superior to you in organization structure. They set your budget. Let's separate those two so we can have an independent, strong regulator to protect us from any overreach from the utilities and to enforce our law in a fair way, in a predictable way. Fifth is to eliminate programs that increase and subsidize new EV demand. It sounds crazy that if you're expecting shortages and if you have high costs, that ratepayers or taxpayers would be subsidizing new demand, yet Connecticut does that. We subsidize the installation of new EV chargers. We subsidize, that's through our electric bill. We subsidize the installation of new heat pumps through zero interest loans financed through our electric bills. And we subsidize the creation of data centers through a tax subsidy. The latter is the one that I had the greatest hope for eliminating this year. But even that, I couldn't get through some people who objected in the General Assembly. Sixth and finally is we need to increase the supply of natural gas in the winter, secure our natural gas supply. The governor and the president have both spoken in favor of increasing the capacity of existing natural gas pipelines. This isn't just a nice to have. I don't see how you could be expecting to increase electricity demand by so much in the next 2 decades and expect to keep the lights on without an affordable and reliable source of energy. The natural gas supply and pipeline are at a bottleneck currently. It's either natural gas or it's oil. I mean, those are the two choices. And natural gas is cleaner and it is actually cheaper by pipeline. So we should go with natural gas. If you can get Lamont and Trump to agree on something, I think you have to go with it. That's kind of my that's my back of the envelope for you. So what can we achieve if we undertake good reforms like these? In the medium term, we could save you 20% on your energy bill by taking out the public benefits costs. That's nearly $700 of savings for the average customer in our state. In the long term, we could deliver even lower costs compared to the baseline, which is a scary baseline. We can improve reliability and confidence in our energy grid and portfolio. And we could create a state that's more affordable with more economic opportunity, job creation, and growth for everybody. We could lower household budgetary costs. We could make being a homeowner or a renter more affordable. We could bring the state in a better direction. And that's what this tour on energy reform is all about. Just like we need to reduce housing costs, we need to reduce property taxes, we need to reduce energy costs and taxes writ large to make our state better for everybody.
Wow.
I'll end it there.
Thank you. That was really sobering, Ryan. Thank you so much for that. We have some questions from the audience. One of them is from Matt Halleck, which I think is a great question. You know, there are places in the United States, or in Rhode Island and even Wallingford, people can choose their own supplier. Why can't we do that in Connecticut?
I'm not the most show webinar. There you go. Stop sharing. So there is a proposal to allow municipalities to buy their own energy, to come together with other municipalities to try to pool their purchasing power. I'm open to that. I express openness to it. I don't think it'll save the day. I don't think that an agent on behalf of municipalities can be able to beat the market and purchase energy so much cheaper. But I was open to the proposal. I think some of my colleagues on both sides were in favor of the proposal. Others just didn't think it was a good idea. And the opponents basically didn't like the idea of municipalities. Basically, if a municipality opted into doing the purchasing, that means they would need to force all their residents to opt out. So all the residents would be automatically enrolled into the municipal purchasing. And the people who opposed the reform did so for that reason. So that's the question of municipal aggregation and the pros and cons of it. I'm open to it. I don't have a very strong opinion on it.
Okay. Then I just want to answer his question about the millstone payments. One gentleman says some of the numbers representative may have been a little lower than what the reality is. Maybe you can explain that.
Yeah, listen, in the news and from some of my Democratic colleagues, you were hearing like a 70% of the public benefits is millstone. I mean, I just gave you all the line items there. It was 50 the nuclear contracts were 50 million out of 800 million in costs in 2024 for public benefits. So that's 6 or 7% off the top of my head. The 70% number was the change from one pay period to another, because millstone went from being a credit because it was cheaper than the market source of electricity to being a debit on your public benefits because it was more expensive when the natural gas costs came down from one period to another. So the 70% number they were using was 70% of the increase in public benefits from one period to another. That's like a third derivative. That's That's what did I think Churchill say that there are lies, damned lies in statistics, and that certainly was one of them.
And I would say that that chart that you showed us, which shows the increase from 2018 forward, really kind of tells the whole story. And I think that it's time we have, when that's something that we've been saying at 169 Strong, is that we want honesty. We want good information for residents, and we think it's so important that those housing costs come down. That cost burden number that's been tossed around so much, it includes energy costs. So these electric costs have also ballooned and inflated our cost burden in Connecticut. And I know our residents are all feeling that. Every single one of us are feeling the costs on our energy bills. So the one question I had is, one of the questions someone had asked us on social is, are the businesses experiencing the same issues as the residential ratepayers? Do you
They're
have an
probably
answer?
experiencing it worse. You saw the numbers that we have the second highest industrial electric rate and the third highest commercial rate. And we know that for heavy industrial and manufacturing companies, that energy costs are a higher percentage of their inputs, and it's a very competitive industry. There's nothing stopping capital from investors from building that factory in South Carolina or Oklahoma instead of in Connecticut. Yeah, we have really smart and qualified workers, but if it's twice or three times as expensive for your energy costs, you can hire some okay workers in the other place. And that's why we've had no growth in manufacturing jobs in Connecticut in 10 years, whereas the rest of the country saw it increase by 1 in 12. I mean, that's a substantial differential. And on top of that, the business customers pay sales and use tax on their energy bills. The residential customers do not. So it's a bad situation for our businesses, and that means fewer jobs, lower incomes and wages for people.
I have a question for Senator Fazio. So in all the discussions with all of the housing bills and the anti-zoning bills, and in my opinion, the anti-environmental protection bills, in order to build multifamily housing statewide with half a dozen bills or more, is the discussion elevated about the energy costs? Because obviously that's a huge component, as Maria pointed out, of the housing cost burden, which is part of the calculation that they come up with to say 5 years ago, we needed 90,000 new affordable housing units. Now we need 300,000. How does the number seems to grow and grow, but the bottom line is a big chunk of that is energy cost. So is that a discussion that's being held?
I think the energy debate happens in isolation from the housing debate, and these things shouldn't. Maybe that would be policy intersectionality, but nonetheless, I think it should happen. That we don't talk about the property tax burden, and we don't talk about the cost drivers of high property taxes in Connecticut, and the state is that. It is driving up property tax costs to the point that we're the third highest in the nation as well, because we have 1,400 unfunded state mandates imposed on our municipalities, and the only way to fund it is through high property taxes. High property taxes are regressive, just like high energy bills, and they make it very burdensome to create housing in the state because people are paying that. And as you know, you can pay off your mortgage, but you can't pay off your property taxes. Likewise, you can't pay off your energy bill. You're paying it off. You're having to pay it every single month, and you don't get equity from that. So these conversations can't happen in isolation. I think one of the conceits of the state control people, the anti-local control people, we'll call them housing advocates, is what they like to call themselves in Hartford, is that they want the conversation just to be about zoning. It's not just about zoning.
No.
I mean, zoning is not just about housing either. As Kathy knows, it's about protecting your environmental resources, protecting your infrastructure, and so on. And they want the entire housing debate to mostly be about zoning, when it's about other costs, like cost of bringing in labor, cost of materials, cost of the energy bills you pay in your home as a renter or a homeowner, the cost of your property taxes, which are paying out your nose or through your rent. We need a intersectional conversation on policy. It can't just be zoning in isolation.
Absolutely.
Or strategic planning, we would also call that, right? Strategic policy making, where it's all comprehensive and included. That's why sometimes I say this isn't tolls. Tolls is very understandable.
Mhm.
This is so complex, and there are so many different elements that play into it, including market cycles of supply and demand that we're seeing now. That there are a lot of really hot markets in the southern states that are now experiencing a real slowdown in their, in demand for housing. So, it's just a matter of time where some of this turns around as well. It's a very interesting time to watch what's happening.
Yeah, we have some questions from the audience. I will go live to George Skakel. Hey, George, good to see you. I think you are. I will unmute you.
Okay, I'm unmuting.
Okay, go
Did
ahead.
you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, well, I wrote it out. I'm just curious, there's a fairly large wood burning plant in Lakeville, Connecticut. And I did some analysis, and the delivered BTUs from wood, it's better than oil, but that's just an idea. But I think I want to thank Ryan for spending his time with this, explaining it. This state is just spending too damn much money. There shouldn't be all of these charges. I mean, Florida is eliminating their real estate tax now. I think they're charging tourists more, but they have that. But the state is getting ridiculous to live in. Of course, they're not getting manufacturing jobs. You'd be crazy to open a manufacturing job plant here because of the energy costs.
Yeah. Do you have a question though?
Well, there was a question that I wrote
Yeah.
about where's the hydro coming from and how much does it cost? And I understand there's a ton of cheap Canadian hydro.
Yeah. Good question, George, and thanks for the question. It was good to see you yesterday as well. So there's a lot of Canadian hydro, and we're building out more Canadian hydro. And the question is which state should bear the cost in the Northeast of that? And it looks like maybe Massachusetts is going to be able to bear more of the cost of that, but it's probably 7 or 8 cents or 9 cents per kilowatt hour to pay for the transmission. So it's a little bit above the market, but that's probably, if you keep things in the single digits, it's probably something we're going to do, because the alternatives is like, the wind and stuff, and the solar, which is very expensive. So there's that. But there's a lot of, small run of river plants, small dams all across the state, with kind of permitting and zoning and other things, siting issues. It's difficult to create new hydro. I mean, a lot of these are old assets. I think our priority needs to be, first, keep the existing hydro online. We can't have them closed down. They're not unaffordable. Generally speaking, keep the existing hydro online. If there was new that we can get from Canada, we should do it. It's probably a little bit above the market, but it's not far off. There are wood for fuel assets in Connecticut, as you mentioned, and there is a program to support them in the Renewable Portfolio Standard. So there's options there. I saw from Nick had a question. The graph is not good for this. This was not the most recent. I fired up the copy of not my most recent file. So the staff did do a good job of correcting the graph of cost per megawatt hour on the last on a more recent presentation, and I just opened up the wrong one. Also looking at, Fred has a question in here. The high capital costs of nuclear. We're hoping, so when the bill that we passed 2 years ago, we became the first state in the nation because of that proposal that I and a couple others made to include new nuclear in the Renewable Portfolio Standard. The hope is that in 10 years or so, small modular nuclear reactors will be commercializable, they'll be affordable. So yes, there's very high capital costs, and that's prohibitive at the moment. But in the future, we're hoping that those economies get better and that they can afford to build new nuclear, and there'll be small modular reactors, again, zero carbon, reliable, but they need to be more affordable. We can't force that to happen from the government's perch, but the goal was to make policy improve the the runway for new nuclear. And I'm hopeful that by including it in the renewable portfolio standard, we'll have made that a little more likely. Millstone in Eastern Connecticut has expressed openness to siting new nuclear small modular reactors in Waterford at their existing site. That would be fantastic. But everyone in the industry seems to agree it's still probably 10 years away from being commercializable.
Got it.
So if we eviscerate local zoning, which is what the housing advocates want to do, I mean, will Connecticut be affordable? Well, I mean, after seeing all this, I don't think it will be.
I mean, I don't think so. I think that there are ways to create affordability in housing that would still respect local zoning. You know, places like New Jersey that have embarked on really radical anti-zoning projects like Fair Share are not more affordable than it used to be, and certainly not more affordable than any other state in the country. There are ways to create affordability in housing while respecting local rights. We propose bills. You all support bills every single year, dozens of policy reforms to do that. But the state won't be affordable and housing won't be affordable if you don't make energy more affordable. And we'll never be able to create jobs if we starve ourselves of affordable energy in New England and in Connecticut. We'll never be able to create affordable housing and affordability generally if you have the second highest tax burden, the third highest property taxes in the country. There's a lot we can do to make the state affordable. And it normally involves leveraging your community input, leveraging local control, and creating the right reforms rather than centralizing all control and decision-making in Hartford. That's what got us into this unaffordable mess in this state, and it's not going to get us out.
Well, Fair Share alone would require my town of Fairfield to add how many units, Maria? Thousands of units.
It's over
Thousands.
2,000. Yeah.
Without adding, it's an unfunded mandate, without providing any funding to the town to
For
add to infrastructure, school facilities, town hall personnel to do all that permit approval. A huge burden to add all those affordable units, and among other bills that are pending, which would mandate or incentivize and reduce control and have takeovers by state officials instead of local officials. It's kind of scary to think about. That would make the cost go up.
Yeah, I do. I know, Senator Fazio, you have to jump to another
Okay.
commitment, so we will let you go. But this has been illuminating, no pun intended.
Thank you.
But thank you for this, and we will keep
Thank
the
you, and
conversation
thank
going.
you to CT169Strong for all you do. You really not only keep the public informed about all these sprawling proposals and issues, but you often keep me informed of them. And there are so many different troubling housing and zoning proposals coming before the General Assembly this year that I have to look at your cheat sheet for all the committees I'm not on to keep track of them. So I encourage all your attendees and supporters and members to continue to support your group and to continue to look to your group for the information on all those bad and the few good bills that are still in existence as we come on 6 weeks from till the end of session. So thank you for having me.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
Thanks so much, Ryan.
Well, Maria and Kathy, we will keep you here. Really appreciate his presentation. That was terrific.
I know it's heady. It's very interesting. We only got a little bit of a glimpse of it when we looked at some of the bills that were being discussed this session. But I think it's really an important discussion, and it really is. There's some opportunity here, and we hope that the Senate and the House will consider these suggestions, because I know there's been a lot of back and forth up there recently, and arguing even within the Democrats on how they're going forward on the bills. But I think Ryan proposed some very rational, reasonable, common sense solutions and ways to address it. And I think the key is for, residents have to speak up. So, it's not just, oh my God, here's another bill and it's really high. We need people to actually speak to their legislators, to take a look at. We'll send out Ryan's updated version of his sheet, of his presentation again, and then we'll make sure that we'll have contacts for everybody to be able to get in touch with your legislators, because they need to hear from you now. And it's not just about our zoning bills, it's also about these energy bills, because we want to make sure that we don't have unfunded mandates going on our municipalities, that we don't have too much burden on our electric bills. And we have to include all of these things.
Absolutely. And then before we move on, I do want to acknowledge that State Rep Tina Corpus is in the audience. So really appreciate her. She represents parts of Stamford and Greenwich. And earlier I did see Representative Steinberg from Westport. So appreciate him being on for some of the presentation tonight. So Maria and Catherine, as we sit here, where are we in the legislative process? We're about a month and a week away, I think, from the close of the session. So where are we with zoning and how can people get involved?
Well, this is the critical time here. I believe starting Monday is when any of these bills, I know they have certain dates already set when they're going to have meetings up in Hartford, where they're going to have sessions in the House and the Senate. There's over 70 bills, 69, 70 bills that we're watching right now. Not all bad bills. There were some really great bills as well, but those bills have not necessarily come out of committee, but because they had a public hearing, they could potentially still get into a bill. So there are some wonderful bills that are out there.
I guess what are some of the negative, some of the bad concepts that we're seeing?
Well, some of the bad concepts are things like as of right development. There are a ton of bills that talk about as of right development. And I guess maybe I'll let Catherine talk for a few minutes about why as of right is so bad. And then maybe I'll go through
Absolutely
which bills are involved.
So as a zoning commissioner and also as a private attorney who represents environmental interests oftentimes, people, when people complain about 8-30G, that's bad enough, but at least you have a hearing. Even though the zoning commission's hands are tied, we can't follow our own regulations, and the burden of proof flips when we go to court, we still have a hearing. Anyone can file an environmental intervention into an 8-30G and bring experts in and show environmental harm. A lot of these bills that would eliminate a hearing eliminates that. You won't have the ability, it'll be rubber stamped at the front office of your zoning department. No public hearing, no testimony, no expert witnesses, no environmental intervention. Anything that's as of right will eliminate the public hearing. It will also eliminate the zoning commission's ability to make conditions of approval. So our commission, which Alexis is a member of as well, we have passed a few 8-30Gs, and we've put conditions of approval on them that make them marginally better. I still felt we shouldn't have voted that way, but aside from that, we at least have the discretion to do that. If you don't have a public hearing, you don't have that opportunity. The hands are tied. It's almost like, why do we have a zoning commission at that point? And then there are other separate bills which directly attack the Environmental Protection Act of our state. It's called CEPA, C-E-P-A. 22A-19 allows any human being or entity in the state to file an intervention into any type of proceeding, zoning, conservation, a court case, to raise environmental issues. There's a bill pending that would eviscerate that by making you have to be an abutting neighbor or an established nonprofit, neither of which makes sense. That law has been around for 54 years, and it recognizes the public trust we have in our natural resources and the requirement that everyone be able to protect our resources. I was told at Earth Day this week by a member of our state delegation who's on the Environment Committee, and it's shocking that the Environment Committee would propose a bill to eviscerate the law that they passed 54 years ago. It was proposed by the Environment Committee. The purpose, I guess, of changing it is because somebody in Trumbull is filing a lot of interventions. And there are ways the court can assess costs if you're abusing the process. You should not pass a bill that eliminates everyone's right in the state of Connecticut to protect our environment. That's basically what I have to say about that.
Okay. So we have bills that are, converting motels to residential as of right, commercial to residential, and industrial to residential as of right. And so commercial to mixed use, that's great. But again, to as of right, the governor's bill even includes the opportunity. It's a good bill that we would otherwise support, but it requires as of right development. And again, we want to make sure that people can, within their communities, have the local zoning discretion if they, and when you talk about environmental impacts, it could be sound, it could be air, it could be water, it could be any of these things. And so these environmental considerations are very important. And it's not just to a 100-foot, the one bill I know that talks about like no one more than 100 feet away can intervene. And those are the kind of things, and they have to have a certain percentage of the neighbors within the 100 feet that can intervene. And then they are trying to limit the amount of the zoning commission to do a change in a zoning in an area. So these are all problems. Another bill is the builder's rush bill, which would be Looney's bill, that talks about as of right development in the TOD until you reach a minimum average overall density of 15 units an acre, which is astounding because that means anyone can build as dense as they like. And until you reach that number, your local zoning is totally gone. Another bill takes away and makes the entire state 1 acre zoning. Then there's
Gets rid of local, that's essentially single family zoning, more or less.
it
1 acre,
eliminates anything that's above 1 acre
right,
zoning.
okay.
So like if you have 2 acre because it's in a wetland or a
Right.
watershed area where you want to protect an environment, that doesn't matter anymore. They're not even considering the soil. It's just creating a one size fits all policy. And again, these are the problems. You know, when you try one size fits all, it's never going to work. Rather than working collaboratively with communities and saying, okay, it makes sense to have a downtown area or somewhere we can have maybe lighter density in a downtown or whatever, and you work with and you help local zoning commissions come up with updating their regs, and that we all try to do that. I know we've just gone through in New Canaan our recent POCD, and we're working on updating our regs right now. So this is a natural, normal process that every town goes through. They're trying to take away a lot of the undermining the rights of the local zoning commissions. Housing authority jurisdiction is another one, once again, where they're trying to have outside housing authorities build any other town that they want to without their permission. What else? They have they're taking away the rights to have a payment in lieu for conservation. There's that opportunity. There's that where, like, if there's a rezone, they're trying to eliminate any requirements or the P&Zs could allow for some conservation easements on there, which again is part of what our state wants, is to have a certain amount of conservation land. We are already, I think what are we, the fourth smallest state and the third most densely populated already. And so now they're just trying to take away any opportunities for conservation. What else? Oh, and then they have one for a judge can award litigation fees to a developer if they lose their appeal, to the town, if the town loses their appeal. And the judge deems that they may have been a delay tactic or something like that, that they can now award those judgment fees. And I'm like, well, what about if there's an excessive development and the developer loses, or they were doing it in a wetlands? Why are we not awarding the money to the town for their litigation costs? It should seem to go both ways to me. That it's not really fair these should be more collaborative processes, and it's unfortunate where
And I
we
would
are.
say, and I don't mean to interrupt you, but I would say,
Okay.
as we've observed, the legislative process for the last 5 sessions, what we see is blaming the suburbs for not doing enough when it comes to building affordability. It's a blame game. It's really not a collaborative process. And I can tell you, Kathy and I sit in the zoning commission together for the last 3 years. We have done a lot to to allow more density on smaller parcels. We have very liberalized AD, accessory dwelling unit regulation. We have transit-oriented development districts that allow more density. So we've been doing that hard work for many, many years, and we just don't get credit for it because the affordable units, many of them are just not counted under that 830G narrow definition of affordability. So I wish all the zoning commissioners would go up to Hartford and talk about the great work our towns are doing. New Canaan is building 100% affordable. So I think everyone recognizes that we do need more diversity of housing, but we're just not getting that credit. And it's a little tone deaf, quite frankly.
Well, there are two numbers that I always think about. One is the 10% exemption ratio for 8-30G. People call it a target or poor planning if we don't have 10%. It's absolutely ridiculous. Read the white paper that CT169 wrote, too detailed for this conversation. Many, many problems with that exemption ratio. But also the number they're bandying around that they've been throwing around for 5 years now. It started at 90,000. Now it's between 150 and 300,000, the need for new affordable. I don't understand the economic or statistical foundation for that number. And that number is driving all these bills. People are just throwing these massive numbers out. Multifamily is being built for the last 5 years all over the place. We've got 2,000 units that could be built in Fairfield. They're either approved or in process that no one has seen yet. And what they and 8-30G eats up middle housing. Middle housing isn't existing duplexes are not counted unless there's a deed restriction. So we're not even counting what we have. But all these bills, they use the 8-30G definition of what's affordable as opposed to just what really is affordable. There's many, many problems with all the numbers and the nomenclature. And I think there's almost a hysteria to eviscerate any kind of environmental protection to just build a whole lot of multifamily housing.
And you know, that's an interesting point you bring up, because we've had some recent, we still have to get together with someone has reached out to us who's out of New Haven, and they have issues with the fact that New Haven's gotten rid of all their parking requirements. One of the other state policies that's being floated around right now is eliminating entirely any required off-street parking for any development, which is insane, and it doesn't work in many places. And when this law came up, this policy came up years ago, there was a compromise made that it was a potential for an opt-out. And many different municipalities throughout the state decided to opt out, mainly because they wanted to be very specific and very bespoke about where they put what type of parking requirements, because maybe certain areas you can't have an ADU, or you can't have, you can't have on-street parking because it's only a one-lane road and you have fire concerns, or, fire truck concerns being able to get through a road. So there's all these reasons that locally they're legitimate. They're honest, legitimate reasons decisions made by local municipalities, by the local leaders within these municipalities, to make sure that it works for their communities. And that's what's now being totally taken away, or attempted to take away. So this is yet another one, is the idea of the no off-street parking required anywhere. But I guess the last two bills I want to talk about, which Ryan touched on briefly, was the fair share bill. And I do have I've heard some news that there is going to be some version of this bill that's going to be coming out.
Can you just give an overview of what fair share is?
So fair share, there was a study that was done 2 years ago. In the middle of the night, 2 a.m., a bill was passed to require a study. And this group out of Oregon did the study, and they've come up with 3 different versions of an amount that every municipality might be allocated of a fair share. Now, the original version of this bill was the Open Communities Alliance Fair Share Bill, which was not based on anything rational in terms of like access to jobs or development ability, or the need for affordable in the community. It just basically went on 4 highly correlated wealth factors and nothing else. And then they allocated units. So this study has rolled forward, as Catherine said, because now the housing cost burdens have increased as all of these other costs have escalated the last couple of years. They've rolled forward those numbers to say, okay, what should the numbers be for this year based on that OCA methodology? And then they did a separate version, because what that methodology did was it eliminated the largest cities that were poverty cities. So the Hartfords and the New Haven, or the Waterbury, the Bridgeport, those were eliminated from having any allocation. And those units were then reallocated to every other municipality. But they capped them at 20%. So if you had a 10%, you were trying to get to this 10% threshold in 830G. Now you've got this other thing that's coming out, fair share, which is competing with, not going away, but competing with fair. And now we're going to require a much higher percentage for any municipality of affordable units to be created in their municipality.
Yeah.
So the next version, so that's the first version they updated. The second version said, okay, well, we're going to give cities some units as well, but we're not going to cap any town at 20%. So just max them out. So you've got some towns that are getting like double their housing units, or close to 50% increase in their total housing unit allocations. And then there's a final version. And then the final version, the bill as it was originally decided, when they hired they said to them that they wanted them to go out to some city planners to be experts that they would talk to come up with a way to create a different model that isn't this OCA model that's really didn't work and got turned down 2 years in a row. So this third model has three categories that are weighted equally. One is the amount of your affordability. The second is your access to jobs within a 30-minute drive or an hour of train service. And the third category, I'm trying to remember now. It was access to jobs, affordability, and it'll come to me. So those numbers, again, are interesting because even the cities get very high allocations, like 5,000. Some of the cities, like larger cities, have 5,000 units of housing allocated to them. And from what I understand, is some of the people have said, well, the cities don't have the infrastructure for that. And we're like, oh, well, welcome to the discussion. That's what we've been saying all along, is that none of these towns have these allocations. None of this, even in this study, considers the allocations and whether you actually have the infrastructure and the services needed to support that kind of development, because nobody does. And so this is where it'll be very interesting to see how this comes forth, because it's just a recipe for disaster. And, the highest local property tax state, New Jersey, the only one that has fair share. So we really don't want to go down that path, because again, we're talking about all these different items that impact our affordability in Connecticut, and property taxes is one of them. And for sure, should fair share pass, they will go up, because there will be a burden that's placed on the infrastructure in all of our municipalities as a result. And we're all going to be competing to build, and that's just going to drive the costs up even higher. And it's just not affordable right now. So it's a pretty story.
Yeah, scary. I do want to switch gears a little bit. We have another question from the audience. If you can talk about MRDA, the Municipal Redevelopment Agency. I know many towns are, I think, in the process of being part of MRDA. I know Fairfield may take it up at the next RTM meeting. Catherine, I know that you've been studying it, so maybe you can talk about it.
So it's an opt-in and totally voluntary, unlike the bill known as Work, Live, Ride, which we don't believe is totally voluntary. But so it's opt-in, meaning you don't have to do it. They're on kind of a promotion tour since the governor put more money in the MRDA was kind of it kind of fell down a little bit during the pandemic, and now it's ratcheting back up again. It was formed like, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago. And it's to help distressed cities to revitalize their town center or their transit district. But the stated goal of the Municipal Redevelopment Authority is to add substantial amounts of multifamily housing. So if you you get grant money to do different types of infrastructure improvements. But the problem is the strings attached are you give up zoning control. So, and the people that decide on behalf of your town are not your zoning and planning commissions, which are working on probably the 10-year plan right now, regulations, projects. They know land use in your town. They're not the ones who make the decision. They don't even have input. It's the legislative body. So the town council or the RTM can vote on that. So in Fairfield, a presentation was made by the person, his name is Mr. Corris, I think, who's the person in charge of the MRDA, which is a state quasi-public agency. And he's going around and trying to recommend that people, we'll give you grant money. The problem is the grant money, you're going to need more grant money because you're going to have to build more housing, because they will pretty much take over your zoning. So if your legislative body opts in to get the money, you have to do what they want. So our zoning board may or may not have, they'll decide on a footprint of where this district will be, basically a housing accelerator district. And you will lose control within that district. And then since the goal is to add substantial amounts of housing, well, Fairfield already has a lot of housing that's going to be built, okay? And it's already been approved or it's in process. I don't think, my opinion, we should sign on to this because we lose control over zoning. So it's a double-edged sword. I think a lot of towns can really benefit from it, and it is an opt-in. So there's no penalty if you don't opt in. I just think a town has to really be fully informed on what you could be giving up or what the strings are that are attached. And it's probably, many towns have signed up, like towns that do have the need for some grant money to revitalize some of their areas. My town, I don't think needs it.
And I think I think if I read somewhere that Madison did look into it, but then they decided to not go with it
Yeah. Yeah.
for
Yeah.
what it was.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So I do, I know we're getting close. I know we spent a lot of time talking about a lot of interesting topics, energy being really important. Is there anything else that you wanted to touch on tonight?
You know what? We didn't really talk about work, live, ride tonight. And I know Catherine had texted something and asked, I don't know where you got the question from, but someone asked about whether there's been that old grandfathering always comes back
Oh, yeah, so
again.
give us a lowdown on work, live, ride.
Okay, so the latest that I know, as far as the version of the bill that is the LCO, that was passed out of committee, it gives an opportunity for a municipality that has transit currently, that has a TOD currently, to potentially be able to not do those three as of right requirements that are in that bill. And the as of right is in the TOD, you have to allow 830Gs as of right, which again, you only have health and safety and limited for historical or wetlands. Like there's very limited ways to decide, if there were issues with 830G, and now they want to make that as of right. They also said that anything up to 9 units would be as of right. So the thought is that if you already had an existing TOD, you could potentially not have to change that zoning like you wouldn't necessarily, but anyone else who would opt in would have to adopt that as of right, and the ability for nonprofits, churches, the state, your municipality, housing authorities, they would also be allowed as of right development of affordable within communities. And that number of what percentage is affordable keeps changing. So that might actually be even lowered as well. So that's the concern. It's not true grandfathering, right? So like, let's just be clear on that, because if it was grandfathering, if you liked your zoning, the way it came out at the last session was, if you liked your zoning, you can keep it. This is not quite that. So you still have to get approval by OPM to whatever, and maybe they will, and maybe they won't, and maybe it's arbitrary, and you just don't know. So, but you can decide to try it and then back out if you don't agree with it. Just don't take the money first.
As a zoning commissioner, people hate 8-30G, but at least they get a public hearing. If you have the wherewithal to hire an expert, you can give us the evidence and we can deny it, and that could potentially be upheld in court or settled on a scaled down version. But when you have as of right, that all disappears. So you're talking about in the transit zone, basically no control over anything. If there's a need for open space that's not already protected by an easement or a wetland law, that's gone. We have no ability to protect it. That's the problem. It's anti-environmental.
100%.
It is. Which is why it goes back to what we said about as of right from the beginning, is that it's just not good policy. And we need to protect our environment. We need to protect our communities. And I'll mention this one more time. We probably beat this drum quite a bit on social media, but Westcott came out with a report. So 80% of the privately held land around public water supply and watershed is not adequately protected by the state. This was something that was found by the Fair Share Study Group, actually, because they compared our legislation that's existing with other states, even around us, and California, Oregon, other areas. And we are lacking state protections. So what we're lacking in state protections, we rely on our local planning and zoning, inland wetlands, all of those different commissions, those appointed, elected commissions, to make sure that we are protecting our environment and that we are doing sound development that's strategic, that supports growth, but in a smart and planful way. And now these policies, these bills that are being tossed around, and we're going to be hearing about in the next 6 weeks, potentially, are meant to just override all of those protections that we have. So we are here to encourage everybody to read that report. You can go to westcog.org, and under their policies, or they have presentations on there. And one of them is they're protecting our water supply and public water supply and watershed. And they have recommendations for every single municipality in Connecticut. And I highly recommend that you reach out to your local leaders and make sure that if the state is not doing it, that your local municipality starts bringing your code up to scale to make sure that you're protecting it as your own municipality while you still can.
Yeah.
So I highly encourage you all to read that.
Yeah, and we've been talking about a lot of different zoning concepts tonight and bills and throwing out numbers and whatnot. But go to CT169Strong.org, and we have a cheat sheet. We have a lot of breakdowns of all the bills. And I really, we urge you to go there and contact your legislators, write them, call them, write on their Facebook page, really sound the alarm, because, local zoning could be going away this session. I mean, we have been following 30 plus bills that are really out there to get rid of single family zoning in Connecticut. And, as Ryan talked about earlier, there has to be more of an intersection when it comes to discussion, because zoning, energy, environment, they're all interconnected. They all have implications on each other. So I think we will definitely be continuing the conversation in the coming weeks. These weeks will be very critical relative to decision making on these bills, and we will always keep you apprised. And we will keep the conversation going. So look out for our next webinar. We'll probably have it in another week or two. Really appreciate everybody's time tonight and attention, and have a good evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
CT169Strong is an all-volunteer grassroots organization. There is no paid staff, no expensive executives, no fancy offices. 100% of all contributions are used to pay out-of-pocket expenses, like web and email services, advertising and professional lobbying, boots on the ground in Hartford. Without hundreds of supporters, much of what CT169Strong does would not be possible. Since 2020, CT169Strong has been the unifying voice of Connecticut's 169 towns, standing against a barrage of anti-zoning proposals from well-funded developer-fueled nonprofits. If CT169Strong had been around in 1989, 8-30G might have been stopped before becoming the scourge of neighborhoods and communities across Connecticut. Now is the time to stop work, live, ride, and fair share legislation. Once that genie is out of the bottle, it will do irreparable damage and be impossible to put back in the bottle. To stay abreast of the never-ending march of anti-zoning proposals in Hartford, to know how and when to let your voice be heard, go to CT169Strong.org. Please note the red button in the upper right-hand corner for a link to the donations page. Every dollar goes directly to saving neighborhoods from Hartford overreach. Thank you.